Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Ramadan Kareem. On behalf of the United Arab Emirates Internal Auditors Association, I welcome you to the second session of the 5 series that are being held during the International Internal Audit Awareness Month that has been chosen by the IA Global to be held during May. Our speaker today is Akash Basi. He is a forensic practice leader in UAE and KSA. Akash is a partner with BDO and a forensic partner leader for BDO in UAE and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Today, Akash will be focusing on professional skepticism in internal audit. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Akash Basi. Mr. Akash, the floor is yours. You can go ahead. All the best.
Thank you, Amir, and thank you, IIA's UAE chapter for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this session, which is part of the IIA's International Internal Audit Awareness Week. Ramadan Kareem to everyone, my best wishes. The topic of our discussion today is professional skepticism, integral part of the IIA's value proposition. Now, before we kind of get started, I do want to say that the views that I would be expressing today are my personal views, and they do not in any shape, way, or form reflect the views of my organization, BDO. Secondly, I think we have about an hour. I would plan to speak for about, let's say, 30 to 35 minutes so that we have about 15, 20 minutes left for Q&A at the end, and we can wrap up the session in time. Having said that, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box provided today, and I will try my best to answer and address all of those questions, comments, thoughts that you may have towards the end of the session. Now, just coming back to professional skepticism, it's to me, if you think about it, it is the single biggest challenge facing the auditing profession today. Whether you're an external auditor, whether you're an internal auditor, whether you're a forensic auditor, or you are auditing any kind of entity or an organization, this stands out as the single biggest area where all of us collectively can do more, can enhance a level of skepticism to become more effective auditors. And this is in spite of this area being something that should, at least in my view, be at the heart of every auditor's decision making. Now, when you look at a lot of research, when you look at the guidance that comes from regulators and stakeholders alike, there is much more definitive, I would say, information available from the standpoint of professional skepticism and external audit. But what does it mean for internal audit? Why is professional skepticism, or why should rather professional skepticism be important for internal auditors? Why should it be part of a key value proposition of the internal audit remit to an organization? I think if we move to the next slide, just to kind of think about it, right? If let's say you're an internal audit practitioner internal to an organization, or if you're an internal audit practitioner that is external and works in internal audit consultings and provides clients with internal audit services, at the end of the day, in some shape or form.
Akash, I'm sorry for the interrupt, but can you show only the screen presentation, because we can see on the other side what you are typing? Yes, keep it just a screen.
Yeah, so which is it, okay, let me know if this is visible now.
Yeah, it's visible, we can see it. Yes, we can see it, but in the same time we can see.
Is it just the screen now?
Only presentation mode.
It is in presentation mode, and I just want to make sure when I take it to presentation mode.
Take down, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, but for some reason it's not moving. Just give me a second. I think I'm probably.
Yes.
Please resume slideshow. That's the reason why you have that problem. Yeah. Click the resume button. Press escape. That may be easy.
Talk now, yes, Ninat. Talk now.
Yeah, I'm clicking on that, but for some reason it's not.
No, just
moving.
press escape, Akash.
I did.
Or do you just want to close and restart again? Maybe that might be
Yeah, I
easier.
think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to close it and restart it again.
Yeah.
And hopefully that should work.
Yeah. And if you can keep sharing, then maybe I can just help you to share the screen as well.
Yeah,
So if we are
sorry
able
about
to
that
read
technical.
we can read your notes and everything. That's why.
Understood. So let me do sharing now, and it says it's paused. Can you see it now?
Now, yes. Now, can you click presentation?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Can you now? Can you just go to this show application? That small down arrow that you see below the show application. Can you click there?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think you stopped.
So I should go to the presenter view, right?
You're in presenter view. Just take the one where you have only your full screen with the presentation.
Hold on. Oh, God. Is that good?
No, we can't see. Yes, please. Correct. Beautiful. Thank you.
Is that good now?
Yes, go ahead, Akash.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I don't know why that was happening, but it's you know, it's good to know that you're part of fixed now. Sorry. Welcome back, everyone. Sorry for that slight delay. So, what I was talking about was when we look at why professional skepticism is key for internal audit, I think we need to understand a couple of things here. Historically, the role of internal audit has always been, to obtain reasonable assurance, obviously, with what's happening in the world, with the requirements and the guidelines from regulators and stakeholders becoming more and more onerous, for the auditing profession. What's now happening is that instead of us trying to just obtain reasonable assurance, the very definition of what an internal audit is supposed to do or is supposed to achieve is changing, right? Now, personally, I may say some of that is unreasonable, some of that is not warranted, because the objective of internal audit is fairly specific. But having said that, what's important is, and what's coming out in terms of this entire noise, is that the professional skepticism is an area where auditors really need to work, right? And interestingly, if you look at our profession, trust, the way I look at it is that trust seems to be some sort of a professional hazard, and professional skepticism, to begin with, is largely a very unwelcome concept in the world of auditing, for the very simple reason that no one likes answering questions. No one likes being audited. That's just the human nature of how things are. So when you as internal audit professionals go to audit a particular business area or a process, or you're auditing a specific entity, the people on the other side, to begin with, are always slightly on the defensive mode, because nobody likes getting audited. And that's why it makes all the more important that as professionals we have an enhanced level of professional skepticism. Now, the other way to look at this also is one of the key requirements of internal audit, at least today, based on what you see, is detecting fraud and misconduct. Now, I look at it slightly differently. I don't think that the objective of the internal audit should be to detect fraud and misconduct. Having said that, it definitely should be and needs to be able to identify red flags that are indicative of fraud and misconduct. Because when you're going and doing an internal audit, you're actually not doing an investigation. So the objective should never be to investigate, but it should be to be able to spot those trends and patterns and red flags that are indicative of a potential problem that can then be looked into further. So that's the other reason why I think having professional skepticism with an internal audit is absolutely the key. And the other important area of why I think going forward, this is eventually going to become the norm, or is going to be at least a minimum expectations not that it already isn't, but it's just going to become more and more onerous in the future, is as of now, we see a lot of headlines, we see a lot of adverse press against external auditors. It's going to be a matter of time before companies and audit committees and the board start asking the question, well, where was internal audit? Why did internal audit not catch this in the first place? Think of a financial reporting fraud that occurs in an organization, and let's say the heart of the problem is revenue, or the heart of the problem is receivables, or the heart of the problem is related party transactions. At some point, the board will start asking that question, well, internal audit audited this area 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times in the last few years. Why did they not catch it? Therefore, I think what we need to understand is, when we as internal auditors are assessing information, when you're reaching your conclusions, when you're reaching your judgments, it's important to recognize that there are certain biases that influence our judgments and conclusions in the audit process. And it's important to be aware of those biases. It's important to know what we can do to overcome those biases in order to enhance the overall professional skepticism. Okay, let me move on to the next slide. All right, moving on to the next slide, when we talk about insufficient level of professional skepticism, I just want to do a quick check. Is the slide insufficient level of professional skepticism visible?
No, it's the same setting, the content.
So that's interesting. I know why this is happening now. Is it visible now?
But not in young, but just can you convert it to presentation mode? We can see it, yes. Insufficient level of profession. Now we cannot see it.
Hold on. This is just bizarre. I'm so sorry about this. I don't know if it's my laptop or no. Can you see it now?
No. Yes, we can see it. Can you move it to the second slide? We cannot see the slide that you would like us to share. No, it's freeze. Yes, correct. This is, yes.
Perfect. I think I figured out what potentially the problem is. Now it should all be fine. So moving on to, what does insufficient level of professional skepticism leads to? I think the very first obviously is failure to gather competent audit evidence. And let's take a very simple example. Let's say you're trying to audit a new technology, or you're trying to audit a new software implementation in the organization, right? And what you're trying to do is understand the logic, the underlying algorithm, to understand if it does make sense. Now, if you are not exercising professional skepticism at some level, you'll not be able to understand and identify what is it exactly that will suffice as a competent audit evidence to begin with. Obviously, if that doesn't happen, the very second thing is going to be inadequate consideration of fraud risks. Now, this is something that's obviously very near and dear to my heart as a forensic professional, but it's also very, very important from an internal audit standpoint, right? If you do not understand the fraud risk areas in your organization, your entire internal audit process or your entire internal audit calendar will at some level be compromised, because you're not able to exercise that level of skepticism in identifying what is it that needs to be audited, not audited, versus how do you essentially go about planning and supervising your audit cycles. We all talk about this concept of integrated approach to internal audit, but let me ask a question: is it really an integrated approach? How much time do you spend brainstorming within your team and also within the organization with key business leaders to understand and analyze the key areas that need to be audited? And all of this process requires some level of professional skepticism. It should not be that let's go back and see what did we have in the plan for last year, and we'll probably either try to do something different this year, or we'll just go by the audit risks or the fraud risks that we had identified, let's say at the start of the audit cycle or as part of the ERM assessment. It also has to continuously evolve. And that process of evolution will only come from professional skepticism. Now, the last point, failure to exercise due professional care, I think is a very simple consequence. It's very, very obvious. I believe is part of the code of ethics of internal audit professional. And also, if I'm correct, the Institute of Internal Audit's international professional standards also talk about due professional care, which essentially stems from the fact that there needs to be enough of a skeptical mindset to be able to carry out an effective internal audit. What does it mean in terms of what is professional skepticism? So the definition you see up on the screen, I'm sure most, if not all of you, may have either seen this definition or may have seen something similar to what this definition is. The challenge is, I think it's probably better defined for external audit professionals, but for internal audit professional, it tends to be a bit of a challenge because there is no single universally accepted definition of what is professional skepticism, right? And that brings in itself a challenge in terms of thinking how best do you define and how best do you understand it, because if you're not going to be able to understand it, if you're not going to be able to understand what comprises professional skepticism, you're not going to be in a position to continuously apply and enhance your level of professional skepticism. So let's look at the definition. Implies an attitude that includes adopting a questioning or a doubting state of mind and a critical assessment of audit evidence without being overly suspicious. Let's break this down. Let's look at the first part. Implies an attitude that includes a questioning or a doubting state of mind. Where does the questioning or the doubting state of mind come from? In my view, I think it comprises of three things. It comprises of knowledge, skills, and abilities. It comprises of certain actions you take, and it comprises of a mindset. So take an example, let's say you're somebody who leads the internal audit function or leads a team of people that carry out internal audit in your organization. Now you have somebody new in your team that has been assigned an area or a business process or an entity to go and carry out the audit for. This person has the knowledge, but may not necessarily have the skill or the ability, because a lot of that at times comes from experience, right? So you have part of what is needed to have a questioning or a doubting state of mind. Now, an action you could take is to ensure that this individual is appropriately supervised. That's the action the internal audit team or you as a leader of the function can take to ensure that is there. And the third aspect, which is something I'll also dig deeper onto the next slide where I talk about barriers to professional skepticism, is the mindset. Is that ensuring that when you walk in to do an audit, when you walk in to carry out a review, you are neither presuming honesty, neither are you presuming dishonesty. And that is very, very critical, because I think what a mistake that a lot of people in the auditing profession largely make is that when they go into audit an area that they've been auditing, let's say for a very long time, or let's say when they interact with individuals that they've been interacting with for a very long time, one starts to build in a level of comfort. What we forget is that circumstances change from year to year that may now allow an organization or an individual to engage in fraud and misconduct. And there can be no better example than what happened to the world last year or late 2019 when it started, which is COVID-19. We all need to understand and recognize that the circumstances for a lot of individuals or a lot of auditees, if I may use the word, has since changed. So we need to not have a mindset where we know, I have known this individual for the longest time. This individual is somebody who always acts above board, very, very honest. I should not have an issue carrying out an internal audit with this function. So that, coupled with the action and the knowledge and skill, is what I call a questioning or a doubting state of mind. You don't have that, you're not going to be able to get to a questioning and a doubting state of mind. Now, what's a critical assessment of audit evidence? Now, this is interesting. What it doesn't mean that you need to now start investigating everything. That is not, as I said earlier, the objective of an internal audit. But just don't take everything on its face value. simply what that means is look further, look harder, look deeper. And interestingly, for the individuals listening in who obviously applied and exercised professional skepticism, you would relate to this. When you have a questioning and a doubting state of mind, you automatically start identifying areas or issues that need to be looked into further. And that's where it becomes key. Okay, this is an area where I need to critically assess the evidence I'm obtaining. I'm not going to rely on any of my biases. I'm not going to let any of my biases play a role or influence my judgment. Now, the last piece obviously is without being overly suspicious. As I said before, we're not doing an investigation, but it's important to keep in mind that there is some amount of suspicion, which is what I call healthy suspicion. So it should not look like that you walk in and you're inherently saying, well, I don't trust you, I don't trust this organization, I don't trust this process, I don't trust the people that manage this process, but more like, okay, it's trust, but I will also verify. So that's the definition of professional skepticism. Now you must be asking a question, well, this is great, this is a definition, I've seen this before, I've heard this before, we also try to apply this, but how does one kind of become better at professional skepticism? How does one kind of work towards enhancing professional skepticism? And that's where the key piece comes in, which is barriers to professional skepticism. In my view, this is the single most important area to understand, acknowledge, and work with if you want to enhance and have an appropriate level of professional skepticism during your auditing profession. And this to me is absolutely the key. Now, why barriers? For the very simple reason, as individuals, when we interact with people as individuals, especially as auditing professionals, when we audit areas, we forget that unconsciously or subconsciously, it's a natural instinct for us where our reaction comes from our prior beliefs, our prior attitudes, our experience, our history of interaction with people, and they influence the conclusions that we reach. And this is why it's important to understand the barriers. Let's look at some of these. It's just what I have up on screen. It's clearly not an exhaustive list. There are a lot more. There's a lot of research out there, a lot of great reading material out there. There are a lot of people that give examples. I'm going to try and give some here and see. Hopefully they should be able to explain the point further. But let's start with the very first one, which is the overconfidence bias. Now, this is a very interesting one, and the reason I want to start with this is actually the most problematic one. If you look at, and just to give you a quick background, in the US, when the SEC, which is the US regulators for listed companies, when they fine or penalize a company for potential misconduct, whether it's fraud, whether it's non-compliance with laws and regulation, or whatever it is, or when they, let's say, look into the role of internal auditor or the external auditor, they release something called an accounting and auditing enforcement release. And if you look at a survey that was carried out, they identified that over 1/3 of those accounting and auditing enforcement releases, the overconfidence bias was a key reason of why a financial reporting fraud was not detected on time or a company ended up engaging in misconduct. What this means is when you go in, you look at a particular situation, you see a specific problem or you see a specific risk area, the instinctive reaction first is, oh, I know this. I have audited this area before at some other organization, or I have, from my past experience, I know what to do. And it's human nature to, not recognize your own overconfidence, but it's very easy for us to spot overconfidence in others. Oh, this person in my team or this auditee perhaps is very overconfident about the controls that are out there. I know for a fact that, there could be something wrong here. That overconfidence does two things, right? It stops you or it suspends that judgment where you're not able to understand whether your assumptions that form part of your prior experience can also be applied in the current situation. And let's say if you're an internal audit leader having a team of people working under you, it also makes your team question and challenge you less, because when they see that overconfidence, for them it's like, I think he or she knows what they're talking about, and I don't think we should disagree or we should challenge or we should maybe ask questions here. So that's why it's very important to recognize that overconfidence bias. It's very subconscious. I think all of us are guilty of at some level having that overconfidence bias, and that's the key important thing. The second is what I call the familiarity bias. Now, what is familiarity bias? I was giving an example again. It's something which is very closely linked to your tenure. So let's say if you've been auditing an area, if you've been auditing a subsidiary, if you've been auditing an entity for the longest time, you get comfortable with people. You know the process very well. You go in, you know exactly what you're going to do. At some level, you know the kind of result that you're going to expect because you've gotten that consistent result every year. But remember, circumstances could have changed over the last time or from the last time you audited that area. That familiarity you have makes you let your guard down. You start accepting explanations from people easily. You don't question that much, and that's the key of the familiarity bias. What you can do to overcome is, again, neither presume honesty, neither presume dishonesty. Think of somebody you're talking to or somebody you're speaking with as a complete stranger. Would you still pose that level of trust? If not, what else would you do at that point? The third bias is the anchoring bias. Now, anchoring bias very simply tends to be you go in to do a review, you go in to do an audit, you start with the very first piece of evidence that you obtain, and all successive pieces of evidence of information you obtain, you start benchmarking that against the very first piece of information you obtain. And if that evidence kind of agreed with your prior belief of what you should have seen, then everything following it, whether it's inconsistent, whether it's contradictory, will make it all the more difficult for you to have that unbiased view of what is it that I need to do now. So that's again something that's very, very important. Don't just rely on the very first piece of evidence that you've obtained. This also relates very closely with availability bias, which is, as humans, we tend to rely on the easiest available information that comes first, and we want to see if that again agrees with what we think it should. We want to move forward with that, and that's again something that you should not be essentially practicing. Try to get away from that as much as you can. The budget pressures and deadlines, which I have the last of the screen, also actually influences some of these biases, because as internal auditors, we have strong deadline pressures. You have to carry out multiple audits in a year. Sometimes you want the auditing environment to be as non-disruptive as possible. You also don't want to essentially engage in conflict with the auditing organization, especially if the person you are dealing with on the other side is senior to you. You don't want to get into a conflict situation. So all of that also results in, okay, I've got this piece of evidence, let me run with this, or I've got this piece of evidence, or I'm getting information from somebody that I think is very honest. I've always known them to be very honest. I'm going to absolutely agree with what they're saying. So some of these biases tend to play a huge role in us not being able to exercise a level of professional skepticism that we should. And let me take you back about 20 years. I'm sure all of you would remember the Enron fraud that happened. Now, if you look at the history of that organization, it was one of the most audited organizations in the world. Forget about external audit, it was very heavily audited by the internal audit function as well. But what had happened was that nobody had seen that level of magnitude of fraud having occurred before. Therefore, nobody was able to overcome their bias that something like this could happen in an organization like Enron. And that's the key. But having talked about some of the biases, which are, I would say, more kind of human nature, and different individuals have better understanding, or some have a heightened awareness of their biases, there is still one area which, in my view, is the single biggest barrier to exercising professional skepticism. And that is a lack of an open and an ethical culture in an organization. If the organization does not have a transparent, accountable culture, it does not matter whether these biases are present or not within the individuals, you will still not be able to exercise a level of professional skepticism. So again, that also becomes hugely important, because when you are exercising professional skepticism, please note, you're not exercising professional skepticism just on the process or the area that you're auditing. You're also exercising professional skepticism on the people you're interacting with. You're also exercising professional skepticism on the culture of that process, culture of the organization, culture of that particular business unit. And all of those play a huge role in you being able to understand and be more aware of what is it that you need to do in order to enhance professional skepticism. Which brings me to the next topic is how do you apply and enhance your professional skepticism? Let's start with maintain an objective state of mind, including setting aside prior belief about honesty and integrity. I think I touched upon this before. It's an area that at least every time I do an investigation and when I'm asked by my clients to do a root cause analysis of why do you think Akash this fraud occurred, or what do you think happened here? Was it just lack of controls or was it something more than that? Obviously, there's always lack of controls because, if you didn't have lack of controls, you would not have the opportunity to engage in misconduct, financial reporting misconduct being aside, because for that pressure is more important and opportunity is something that can be created by management override of controls. But the one thing that I see consistently is that if there was an audit carried out of that area before, there was an underlying assumption of we know this entity very well, we know the people very well, and there was an underlying presumption of honesty and integrity on behalf of the auditee, and that needs to change. The second is remain alert for fraud-related pressures, opportunities, and attitudes. And if you see up on screen, I have something in italic and in underline, which is in your interactions. To me, your interactions with individuals within the auditee organization or within the process is as important as looking at the documentation around the controls. And the reason that it is that the non-verbal cues that you obtain when you interact with people are far more powerful in telling a story than a piece of document you'll look at. Those cues will tell you, if you're exercising the right level of skepticism, and this is one of the ways in which it'll help you exercise, because you're looking at the cues, you're asking questions, you're having a conversation, you'll start identifying areas that need to be looked into further. And going back to what I was saying earlier, that's the key. Your objective is not out there to go in and detect fraud, but are you in a position to identify enough red flags, or are you able to ask enough questions to say, okay, there is something here that needs to be looked into further? And then comes the question of how do you go about doing that? Obtain reliable evidence and additional corroboration or explanation of evidence. Now, this is again going back to one of the barriers we talked about, right? When you obtain a piece of evidence, forget about who you're getting the piece of evidence from, or forget about the evidence you're looking at. Think of it as coming from an unknown source. If you're getting that evidence from an unknown source, are there potential steps that you can carry out to further corroborate that information? And if you can, and if the area that you're currently auditing is a high-risk area for your organization, I would highly recommend please carry out those additional steps. That'll help you exercise a healthy level of skepticism. It'll help you do that critical assessment of definition of professional skepticism. Bring in an element of surprise and unpredictability. I actually love this concept. I think it is so important in today's day and age, given the pace at which technology is evolving, given the pace at which fraudsters and the way they commit frauds is evolving, the pace at which regulators are expecting more and more and more. I think this is the key to be able to demonstrate that as auditors, we exercise professional skepticism. Take a simple example. You have an annual audit calendar that you set out at the start of the year, which is part of the broader internal audit plan, right? One quarter, don't stick to it. Make a change all of a sudden. Let's say towards the end of the year, there is a process which, as per your risk assessment, or an area that, as per your risk assessment, was a low risk process. Okay, and there have been some change in controls and procedures around that area, right? This was not part of your annual plan. Pick it up, bring it as part of the annual plan, go audit it. That element of surprise when you start bringing in, it does two things. A, it helps you start looking into areas that are historically not looked into, but B, and more importantly, it makes everybody in the organization think, well, our internal audit team can come in at any point and audit us. Just because we think we are low risk, or we weren't audited in the last 2 years, or we are way below in the area of priority, doesn't mean that we won't be audited. That element of surprise is very, very critical, because what it does is, the more you do that, the more you increase the chances of red flags being identified. And the more you increase the chances of red flags being identified, the more you increase the perception that issues will be identified. And with that, you end up reducing the risk that fraud will be attempted or any sort of misconduct will be attempted. That's why that element of unpredictability and surprise is very, very important. Second to last, train the team, organize team workshops, very, very critical. Again, I think all of us at some point are guilty of the fact that, oh, we just don't have enough time. There's so much we need to carry out. It's such a busy schedule we have for the year. But the war stories of your individual experiences of auditing different areas are so important to collectively enhance the level of professional skepticism that take our time for it. Maybe do it once a quarter, have a 2-hour session, ask a couple of your team members to come in and talk about their experience of auditing a particular area, bring in somebody from the outside, do some sort of a discussion, but talk, because the more you talk and communicate amongst each other, the more, when you are out there auditing the next entity or the next process, the more you are essentially suspending your judgments, and the more you are essentially looking at things the right way by exercising healthy skepticism. The last one, ask tough questions. We all sometimes feel like, I'm auditing this area. I'm going to be interviewing somebody who's 10 years senior to me. Maybe I should not ask this question. Maybe this is a stupid question. There is no such thing as a stupid question in the world of auditing, right? Ask it. If you feel like it's important, it needs to be asked. It needs to be asked. You're doing a job. You're also doing a job on behalf of the organization. The other person is also doing a job on behalf of the organization. So if you feel like the question is tough or too bad, ask the question nonetheless. As long as it's asked respectfully, as long as it's not, disruptive in nature, I think the question should be asked. And it really helps you understand issues that you need to look into. The last part of the last point, which is seek advice, very important, goes back to the overconfidence bias, the barrier that I was talking about earlier. Sometimes we feel like we know it, I've seen this before, I know what I need to do. Take a step back. Maybe should I go seek advice from somebody? Maybe should I bounce this off? Maybe should I brainstorm this with somebody to get a better perspective? Maybe you will come out of it learning nothing new, but maybe you'll come out of it learning 2 new steps or 2 different steps that you should be taking in auditing a particular area that you had not thought of, or your prior experience had not brought that to bear. So that's why it's the asking tough questions and seeking advice that kind of becomes very, very important. So these are some of the areas or some of the steps you can take to what I call diminish the barriers to professional skepticism, or maybe better acknowledge what those barriers are and how to enhance your level of professional skepticism. Now, having said that, I think in the last 12 to 18 months, the world has dramatically shifted, right? For a lot of organizations, your risk assessments and the annual plans or the internal audit plans that were made were essentially turned upside down. People didn't know what to do next. There was just so much, I would say, evolving situation all around that for clients and for organizations just to think about what is going to be my next risk, how is my risk evolving, was becoming a huge challenge. So what is it that you can perhaps do when it comes to assessing and enhancing professional skepticism during the COVID-19 era? And the reason behind that is, I think all of us would be aware, when you talk about business disruption, when you talk about a challenging economic environment, right? When you talk about an environment that is stressed, the risk of fraud and misconduct increases for one very simple reason. Any organization or any individual that essentially thinks of, or let's say anybody who wants to engage in fraud and misconduct will always start out small. And the reason for that is the objective is to stress test the system to see if the system has weaknesses that can be exploited. In a situation like COVID-19, the system is already stressed, so it makes it a whole lot easier for individuals to essentially exploit the system. For us as auditing professionals, given all the stress personally on the work front, generally all around, sometimes it lets you not be that skeptical. So what are some of the additional steps maybe you can think of, very specific to kind of the auditing world, that we can take? Assess if output from automated system is reliable or fit for purpose. I know we're all working remotely. I know a lot of times it's difficult given the situation, but please, let's take a step back and see, well, I am using this audit evidence that is coming directly from the system. That's fine. Have we asked all the right questions to assess if this output is something I can rely on? Because the output is only as good as the input, right? So you need to be able to make that determination, especially in the current environment. Second one, do not overestimate your ability to make accurate assessment of risks. The risks are changing, they are evolving. Go back to what I was talking about a little earlier. Seek input, seek guidance, brainstorm. Just don't have that overconfidence bias. I know what the risk is, I know what needs to be done. Do not rely on easiest available information and challenge assumptions. Now, this is again something that is the key, especially in the current COVID environment. I highly recommend, if you're getting information that is not that difficult or was not that difficult to obtain for somebody and provide to you, I would not rely on that information. I would seek contradictory or corroborative evidence to a point where you're satisfied that yes, this now makes absolute sense, which is what I was going to talk about in my last piece. Look for contradictory information from external sources. The third-party verification, very fundamental to internal audit, always tends to be the key, right? As us, when we are part of the financial reporting supply chain, that becomes very, 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 very important. Avoiding unwarranted faith in data is again something that is very critical. Your interactions. Try to have as many interactions as you can. When I say in person, I mean virtually rather than just telephonically. So when you're having your meetings, when you're having your calls, especially when you're having calls with auditing organizations or individuals, it's very helpful. Please make sure your video is turned on to the extent possible. You need to be able to observe the person's non-verbal reaction to your question, the person's non-verbal reaction to some of the issues you're raising or clarifications you're asking for. It is very important in the current environment to be able to understand what is it that needs to be done in order to have a much more healthy level of skepticism. So with that said, just to kind of sum it up, it's a key area for external audit, but I'm confident that in the near future, this is going to be an expectation from the internal audit profession as well. Questions are going to be start getting asked in terms of where was internal audit, and that's why this tends to be the key area. Have that understanding and acknowledgement of what your biases are. What is it you can do to overcome those biases? Avoid jumping to conclusions. Keep an open mind. Suspend your judgment. Ask as many questions as you want. Turn to expert for an advice. Brainstorm, very, very key. Also, lastly and more importantly, if you are the internal audit leaders in your organization, train your team. There is absolutely no substitute for practical training of your team members. The more they interact with senior resources, senior professionals that have years of experience, the more they learn, the more they will know how to hone in their professional skepticism better. And that eventually will help you carry out more effective audits. And I'll leave you with one thought, right? Have the self-awareness and the humility to understand the biases that influence your judgment. If you have that, you're going to essentially enhance your skepticism to the next level and become much, much more effective at carrying out internal audits. Thank you for listening. I think we've got about 15 minutes left. Sorry, we had a bit of a glitch in between in terms of the slides. I'm hopeful this was informative. I'm going to turn to the chat box to see if we have any questions, but really look forward to your thoughts, comments, questions, if any. It doesn't have to be a question. If you have a thought that you want to share with the larger group, please feel free to do so. And thanks for listening.
I don't think there are any questions now, but in case there were in the future, we'll get back to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Akash. Wish you a lovely day ahead, and thank you for the support extended to the association and to the members. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed the session today, and should you have any questions regarding the session today, please come back to us so that we communicate with Mr. Aksh and forward it to him. And the presentation will be sent to you, inshallah, and it will be on the website as well. Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon today, and looking forward to meeting up with you tomorrow morning, inshallah. Have a lovely afternoon. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.